Hey, welcome to This Week in History with Mike and Will. I'm Mike.
I'm Will.
Here we go. Today we are streaming this via Zoom because we live in a time and era where self-quarantining is a thing sometimes.
Sometimes, yes.
In order for us to both be happy and safe, we're staying away from each other's lovely bodies.
That's right.
But the same rules still apply. We're going to we have a historical event that happened this week in history at some point. This one happens to be from 1170, December 29th. And Will has 1 hour to explain it to me. And I'll ask him questions and cause merriment as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I feel like you have to hold the hourglass up high because I can't see it now.
Oh, I'll hold it up. Don't worry. I'll hold it up.
Every so often, just.
Yep, like your impending death.
Yep.
All right, so without further ado, Will has 1 hour to explain to me the assassination of Thomas Becket, which happened in 1170, December 29th.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exciting.
Okay, so Thomas Becket was a man who lived in England. So this is what this little story is going to happen in England. We seem to go back to England every so often. We just like to be there, I guess.
Well, we are white guys.
Yeah. We're white guys and Americans, and a lot of our history is linked directly to Britain. So It's important to talk about it.
Ideally, we'll expand our horizons as the days go by.
Yep. I fully intend to delve further into important Eastern European and then Asian and Far East Asian stuff. We did do one in East Asia. We did Japan.
I think we will run out of us before we run out of history.
I think so. I think if we just talked about England, we'd be long dead before we could finish talking about it.
It's an optimistic note to start with.
So. Because it's a lot of history. There's a lot of history, and this event though is a really important chunk of it because it links a bunch of really important people of the time period. So 1170 in England is this kind of it should just say like the mid to later 12th century is kind of a weird chunk of English history because we've come out of a chunk of time called the Anarchy, which was when there was kind of a questionable who's going to be king next situation. And a bunch of claimants to the throne said, well, me. And we actually mentioned in last week for our Christmas episode when we talked about King Steve of England. You had said King Steve, and that's dumb. There's King Steve. That's a dumb name. And so King Stephen had inherited the kingdom basically by virtue of him just saying, it's mine, because a woman can't inherit it. And the woman who should have inherited it, Matilda, did not appreciate that. So she took her kid and she self-exiled. And then she said, well, I'm going to raise my kid to be the king. And her son was the future King Henry II, who showed up in England and beat Stephen of Blois, B-L-O-I-S, Blois, beat him and then became King of England.
I'm sorry,
Henry
II. Queen Matilda is not much better than King Steve.
Empress Matilda. She didn't call herself queen. She's Empress Matilda. So she's very self-important because she at the time did not control anything. She's not in charge of anything. She's like, I'm the Empress.
Yeah, but Matilda is what undermines her.
Yeah, it's not a great name. But Henry is this fascinating English king because he comes in kind of, he's the grandson of the former king, not Stephen, but the king before him, Henry I. So he's got a good claim to the throne, but he's almost immediately beset by like Stephen's followers, people who thought his mother was awful, and he's got to immediately crack some heads together. As he's coming up, he surrounds himself with some pretty impressive people, but he gets really close to this guy named Thomas Becket. Becket was born on the 21st of December in 1119, and Henry was born in 1133. So they're quite a few years apart, about 15 years apart. And Henry kind of looks up to him. he thinks Thomas Becket's pretty cool dude because he kind of does what he wants. He's very charming. He's extremely well liked. He's popular with the ladies. He's good with a sword. And Henry's like, I like this guy. He's got some ambition. So they kind of ride around and cause trouble as youngsters. Like, well, I mean, Henry's a youngster, and he's the impressionable, super rich youngster. And then there's Thomas Becket, who's older and wiser and knows exactly how to get into the best trouble possible.
Now, is this Henry, one of the Henry's Shakespeare plays been written about?
Henry II doesn't have a Shakespeare play, but he is in a play called The Lion in Winter, which is a fantastic play.
Okay.
And Henry goes on to be the father of England's most famous king, which is Richard the Lionheart. So that's his son. And then also England's most infamous king, John Lackland, or King John, the bad guy in all the Robin Hood movies.
Yes.
That guy is also his son.
Oh.
So Henry's more famous for who his kids are, but who he is and what he did with his life is much more impressive than anything either of those guys did. Which is unfortunate because like England kind of worships Richard the Lionheart as this legendary king, but really it was just because he was a thug who was good at hitting people with a sword. Henry was good at that because you had to be, but he's this brilliant, energetic is how he's always described. He's extremely energetic. Like he would get up in the morning and douse himself in cold water, like in winter, and he'd get on his horse and be ready to go, and he'd get his entire entourage to ride out with him from what castle he was at to some random castle that would like upset the local lord, and he was just like, hi, I'm the king, I'm here. And the guy would have to kind of scramble, and you never knew if the king was going to show up at your doorstep. And at the time, what that was really good at doing was making all of the nobles go, I better stay loyal to this king because he could be at my house tomorrow. And he's super charming too, but he's also got like a bad temper because he's the king. He's used to getting kind of his own way, and he's a warrior. So I mean, that's not a guy you really want to make mad. So he's hanging out with Becket, and Becket is not the greatest influence on young Henry. They drink and whore and they cause trouble. It's kind of like the relationship which is good you brought up Shakespeare, because it's kind of like in the beginning of Henry V. Henry V is like young Hal, Prince Hal is trouble. Yeah. And he's always hanging out with this stupid old drunkard knight, Falstaff.
Okay.
And it's kind of like that, except Becket is much more put together, and he's not like a lush. He just likes to party and have fun.
Now, who is Becket in general? Like, was he just a guy? Was he a lord?
Becket at the time was kind of a lesser noble who had gotten into contact with the royal family and was just kind of hanging around the court. And Henry liked him, so he brought him into like his circle.
Okay.
So as they come up together, and as Henry starts to become a warrior and has greater expectations than to just go around and cause trouble, Henry buckles down, and Becket kind of guides him and kind of changes his tune. Like, he's still the wild man and still has fun, but he knows Henry's got stuff to do. So rather than be this albatross around his neck or this anchor around his neck that just weighs him down and ruins his life, Becket gets in line and starts giving him advice. So Henry's like, hey, we've been here together. We've done all this stuff. You're my buddy. And eventually, as Henry becomes more powerful and he goes to war, Becket's with him for a lot of this stuff. He makes Becket his chancellor. So Thomas Becket kind of works himself up from a relative nobody. He's very ambitious, but he's really smart. And like I said, he's charming. He's well liked, and Henry likes him. And they become really close buddies. And they travel together. He's with him in his court, and like I said, Henry gets up the crack of dawn every day, and he starts riding castle to castle to have this really hands-on approach, because there's no phones, there's no carrier pigeons that bring messages, there's nothing convenient. And rather than send out messengers to do stuff, he just goes to places, which wasn't something that a lot of kings did. I mean, travel back then was rough. You're on a horse at best, and you're galloping around. It's dangerous. The horse could throw you at any time, and then you could die. There's bandits, there's rival lords that might stab you. He could have just knuckled down and been like, I don't want to leave my castle. But what is actually seen as a very impressive trait from Henry, and what earns a lot of respect, is that he's willing to go all over. And not just in France, where he's got most of his kingdom. He travels across the channel all the time. And so nobody ever really knows where Henry is or what he's doing until he's there. They're like, oh my God, the king's here. So it's like, you always got to be on your best behavior, because tomorrow King Henry shows up with 100 knights at your doorstep and he's like, hi.
I'm freshly cold showered.
Yep. There's all kinds of stories about like how Henry just kind of appeared and people are like, there's like 100 of you. We don't have food for this many of you. It's like, too bad. I'm here. I'm the king.
Figure it out. At least feed me.
Feed me. We'll figure it out. We'll hang out. And so he did that. He bounced all over the place, and he didn't care if you were a major noble or a lesser noble. He'd show up at your castle and he'd, hang out with you. And he took that opportunity to hold court and hear from his subjects, which was very impressive. Like, the people loved that, because they're like, the king's here and he listens to us. He can't necessarily fix every little thing, like, we had a bad harvest, or this guy's stealing my chickens or whatever, but he would dispense justice as a king, and he'd do that with the lower level people and the higher level people alike when he held court. He was very well respected for that. And Becket was a part of that, because every time Henry's sitting down holding court, Becket's right next to him as his chancellor. So they are like bosom buddies. There's anything beyond that. They're just like best friends that hang out all the time. Meanwhile, Henry goes and gets married to an extremely powerful woman, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who owned the Aquitaine, which we've talked about repeatedly. It's this massive chunk of land in central France, and it's extremely wealthy. And she's a force to be reckoned with. She got sick of her former husband, who was the king of France, and went to the Pope and said, I want my marriage annulled. And she was powerful and coercive enough that she had it done. In a time when that didn't happen, especially not when the woman wanted it, she was like, no, I'm sick of him, sick of his crap. He sucks. He's the worst husband ever. I'm out.
You gotta go to the Pope for that too.
Yeah, and you did. Yeah, you could possibly go to like a bishop, but it usually ended up having to be passed down from the Pope. So this is a very powerful, singular woman of her time. Eleanor of Aquitaine is a very fascinating character. She and Henry get together. And largely because she met Henry once and was like, oh, I like this guy. It's thought that maybe that's why she wanted the annulment in the first place. Wanted to trade up. She thought, well, if I have to choose between Louis and Henry, that guy's better. I like him more.
He showers. I don't know why I'm hooked on that part. But
no, it's a weird thing, because it's mentioned a lot, where he would douse himself in the morning to kind of wake himself up, and he's ready to go. And he did that throughout his whole life. Like, he took baths all the time and stayed passionate and fired up. He didn't live super long. He only lived to be like 58.
Okay.
But there's reasons for that. It's battles and trauma and all kinds of family issues. Sure. But that's not super as important to the story, because what happens with Becket then is Henry starts to get bigger aspirations beyond just his own kingdom. He starts to see himself, and the rest of Europe actually starts to see him as the kind of the de facto arbiter of everything in Europe. He's not quite like the king of Europe, but he's the most powerful man that they know of. Henry is. Right. He's got as much clout as the Pope. In fact, the Pope is kissing his butt at this point, because the Pope has problems. Excuse me. COVID's the worst.
Yeah, sure.
Apparently I don't have it, but tested negative, but I still have an annoying cough.
Still got the sniffles.
Cough and sniffles. It's wonderful. Going on for 2 weeks, and they say that's long COVID, and I'm like, is that like long pig?
Yes.
It is. It's very similar. So anyway, the Pope at this time is Pope Alexander III. And Alexander III had kind of a contentious election to becoming Pope. And some people said, you're not the Pope. And he ended up spending the majority of his time as Pope out of Rome, because people wanted to kill him.
Oh.
Most importantly, the Holy Roman Emperor wanted to kill him. And the
not someone you want not on your side.
That's not, yeah, right. Like he's the largest landholder largely in Europe. Like the Holy Roman Empire is big. It's parts of Eastern France. It's Northern Italy. It's all of Germany and Austria, and it's big and wealthy. But it's not like a super solid. Like the emperor is more like he's allowed to lead because the nobles agree with him. So getting all of his nobles to agree with him and do what he wants takes a little bit of but he's still the Holy Roman Empire, and he's got out. And at the time, the Holy Roman Emperor is this guy Friedrich Barbarossa, which is Redbeard, and he's famous for being kind of like a Henry. He's a strong warrior. He is very brave. He's very charismatic. He's a good leader, and he's very well respected. So the Pope goes to him and is like, can you side with me? And the emperor's like, no, I like everybody but you. And he supports the guys against the Pope. And the Pope excommunicates him. And so he marches an army south of the Alps. And he's like, what did you do? Well, I'm going to burn Rome to the ground.
Oh.
So the Pope is like, I'm going to leave. So the Pope leaves, and he needs somebody to counter Barbarossa, who is a terrifying guy. Well, he goes to the most powerful guy in Europe, Henry.
Yeah, okay.
At the same time, Henry's kind of using this as like a push and pull because he wants certain things as king. He thinks the church is too powerful. He does not like that the church can do things without him say so. He thinks that's unacceptable. I'm the king. I do what I want. You listen to me. Which in a lot of kingdoms later on, especially, you find out, yeah, that's just how kings work. But at this point, like each bishop and even each priest is kind of his own little king of his own tiny kingdom.
Yeah.
And Henry doesn't appreciate that. And since he has this kind of an aspiration of being the big mover and shaker of all of Europe, he wants more absolute control. And he's had problems with rebellions, and he's put those down. Problem. The church is always something you can't really touch. So when the previous lead person, the main representative of the Catholic Church in England, when he I think he died just of old age. It wasn't like Henry didn't whack him. It wasn't like, I don't like this guy, he's gonna die. Henry sees an opportunity to get what he wants, and he appoints his best buddy, Thomas Becket, to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. He figures, well, he was the chancellor, so he's got to have, that'll kind of cost him some clout. He didn't come up through the church, so he doesn't have the support of the church. And he's kind of going to be seen as a lackey for Henry.
But to be a bishop or an archbishop, you don't need previous church experience. You can just be.
Not if the king makes you one.
Interesting. I find it interesting in general that there's always this weird dichotomy between the state ruler and the religious ruler. Yep. Sometimes work well together, and sometimes they do not. And
right. And the state ruler doesn't necessarily get to force, say you're going to be the guy. But when he controls all of the lesser bishops and they all listen to him, he says, that's the guy you're going to appoint. So he didn't walk in and say, Archbishop. He said, you guys make him the Archbishop. I'm the king. You listen to me. We're all buddies. We're having this nice feast together. And wouldn't it be inconvenient if I showed up at your house tomorrow and maybe it burned down?
It doesn't. It amounts the same to telling them to do it.
Yeah, right. Like if the king of the country who has all the guys with all the pokey things says, would you mind doing this?
Please.
You don't need to threaten them. Like, the threat is unnecessary.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
This is the best ever. This is the best.
Time is ticking still.
Tick tock, sands of the hourglass. So are the days of Oz. So Henry has appointed Thomas Becket. He does this, I should probably have marked the year down, but I believe it's in the early 1160s. He gets Becket to be his guy. And he thinks Becket's going to do exactly what I want because he always has. And we're going to have a great relationship. And now I get to have my say in the church.
Uh-oh.
And he could not be more wrong.
Oh, no.
Because the second Thomas Becket takes this role on, he jumps into it wholeheartedly. He goes from being this devil-may-care kind of a playboy, party guy, king's favorite, to this is a serious job, and I'm going to do it properly, and I'm not going to be ruled by any king, and I'm going to be a good man of the church. Period. The other thing too is to remember through all of this is Becket is always seen as extremely ambitious and vain and wants power. Well, now he's completely severed from the king. He doesn't need the king's authority to be in power. He's the most powerful church leader in England.
Oh.
So now he has a chance to pursue his own goals if he wants to, and he does. Like,
do you think that was a plan of his for a long time? Do you think that's why he befriended the king?
I think his plan of befriending the king was kind of I'm going to do well as long as I'm friends with the king.
Yeah.
And he originally didn't want the job of Archbishop. He said, I don't really want this. And Henry's mother and wife were both like, don't do that. Don't make your friend the Archbishop, because you have to work with it and it's not going to be the same. He's not going to be secondary to you as much anymore. He can kind of go and stand on his own 2 feet, and that could end badly. And Henry's like, no, trust this guy.
He's my buddy.
He's my buddy. Well, Becket's an opportunist. And for all we know, Becket had a genuine change of heart where he just suddenly wanted to be very devoted to the church and to doing right by the church and by his office. He maybe took it very, very seriously. Regardless of his motives, he does take it seriously, and he does see himself as his job now. So he stops hanging out with Henry. They stop having their hunts together, and they stop going out and having a good time. They stop having council sessions together. And
that's the saddest part of the story already. Yep. Just not hanging out with your buddy anymore.
Not hanging out with your buddy anymore. And Henry's really disappointed by this because he's like, I just lost my best friend.
Yeah.
And they immediately take on an adversarial role. Immediately. Because Henry's like, well, I gave you this job. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't matter who gave me the job. This is my job, and I'm going to do it. But you work for me. Oh, no. I work for the church, and I work for God, and I don't answer to you. And there's but I made you. You would not be anything if it wasn't for me. And he doesn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
So Henry wants a couple of things. And this is largely why he made Becket in charge, was he wanted to be able to try priests and clerics for crimes. If they break the law, he wanted to be able to say, well, I'm the king, and they're in trouble.
Yeah. Is that a big problem? Was there a lot of...
That was a big problem.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like theft, rape, other situations that were pretty nasty.
And they would just be like, you can't, I'm a priest.
He couldn't touch them. And the priests were supposed to be tried by other priests.
Right.
Well, that goes about as well as cops investigating cops.
Yeah.
And they're not going to tear themselves apart usually, which is bad because it's like, but by letting the bad ones go, it makes all of you look bad.
Yeah.
And Henry doesn't trust anybody to do the right thing. Henry trusts himself to do it, which is problematic for his whole reign. Is as long as he's energetic and powerful in doing what he's doing, it's ironclad. But he doesn't delegate as well as he could because he relies so much on himself. So he wants to do everything himself. He wants to try these people himself or have his most trusted guys do it because he knows they'll act in a way that he sees fit or appropriate for his style of leadership. So these priests are like, yeah, we don't want some king telling us what to do. That's crap. Only the church can tell us what to do. And Becket stands by the priests. He just says, no, you have no authority. It's church matter. You have no control over it. Yeah. If priests do something wrong, priests could walk out in the middle of the street, kill somebody on Fifth Avenue. You can't touch them.
Did they have a Fifth Avenue there then?
I mean, they probably had a total of 5 avenues in all of England at this time. Roads were largely dirt. But the concept was a priest could go out and do whatever he wanted, and the king can't touch him. The church can. And if the king were to violate that rule, he could be excommunicated, which is you're out of the church. And if you're out of the church at the time, like and condemned to hell, that's a huge issue because every leader in Europe is a Christian at this point. So he stands to lose a lot. So he's like, well, I want to try them if they break my laws. And Becket just keeps saying, well, it doesn't matter what you want. Your laws don't apply to the priests. I'll see to it, and I'll take care of the issues that are brought up to me of these clergy as I see fit. And the more Henry pushes him, the less he will do about these problematic priests. Because there's big problems with like tithing, where priests take more than they're supposed to, or they cheat the local peasants, or they don't do the things that they're supposed to be doing, and they just live to get like fat and rich off the land without actually doing anything priestly. Like most people are really mad about the state of things, and Henry's actually trying to fix it.
I would love to see that image of a priest just like not doing anything. Like, I'm not gonna do services.
There were times where they weren't having services. They wouldn't do a weekly mass. They're just like,
kind of lazy.
Where's my milk? Where's my bread, peasants?
I'm a man of God. Give me my stuff.
Yep, and they lived really well. It's kind of like modern televangelists.
Oh, sure.
They just accrue wealth.
Yeah.
And they,
but even they do their TV show though. I mean,
at least they do a show. These priests weren't even doing that. They were just like living well, and some of them they'd go out whoring and drinking, and they'd have wives and all this other stuff. And Henry's like, "This is crap. I don't like this.
Like too sweet of a gig."
Yeah, it's like nobody should have a better lifestyle than me. I'm the king, and I gotta work my butt off for this. These guys are all whoring and drinking, and it's building like all this enmity, right? Like the people are like, these guys suck. So half of his complaints at his courts are the clergy sucks. They're irresponsible, and they're taking stuff they shouldn't be taking. So Henry's like, this is a problem. On top of that, the church is buying up property and has been for some time. And when the church buys property from people, you can't get it back.
Oh.
The king can't seize it. And that was a great way for Henry to punish like his disloyal nobles or people who rose against him, which was a problem again throughout his whole reign, especially his kids. Richard was the worst son in the history of sons. He was constantly rebelling against his dad and trying to kill him and take the kingdom because he wanted his dad to retire and he wanted to be king. And Henry was not having that. So he's just like, no, you go and you become the ruler of this little barony over here and you just shut up. And then Richard would get his brothers together and they'd all fight the king. And this happened multiple times. And Henry, that was largely what is assumed, what killed him in the end was just the stress and the brokenheartedness of having his sons constantly trying to murder him.
Oh, he lost his best friend and then he has family troubles?
Yep.
Yeah, poor guy.
So things get a little worse for Henry in a little bit because now Becket is also saying, well, I know you want this land back. Too bad. It's not yours. It's the church's. It's ours. You're not getting it back.
And I'm taking your dog.
You can't seize land. You can't do anything like that to punish the church. We are immune to you. And Henry flips out.
Yeah.
He finally had because on top of all of this, Henry has the business of running a kingdom. His sons are rebellious bastards who keep causing problems. They stir up the nobles, or the nobles get stirred up, and then they just pick one of the sons to run their rebellion. And so Henry has to either run back to France to beat them up, or go back to England to beat them up, or he's got problems with Scotland, or he's got problems with Ireland. And then he's got problems with the French king, who's technically his liege lord, because Henry owns a big chunk of France. Say hi, Kenneth. That is now on the podcast. So since Henry owns a big chunk of France due to his wife, he technically has to swear that the King of France is his boss.
Oh.
So it's a lord in subservience to another lord kind of a thing. That's the
Yeah,
rules of the feudal society.
I can't
So
imagine that
technically,
sits well with Henry.
yeah, technically the King of France is his feudal overlord. And I mean, Henry doesn't care. Henry just does what he wants anyway.
Yeah.
And he kind of beats this dude down, like just browbeats him into submission. He's like, I don't care that you're my king. My kingdom is twice the size of yours. My army is greater. I'm much more famous. Your wife left you for me. I'm awesome. Buzz off. And he just like kind of crushes this poor guy. And so Louis is like, stupid. But Henry still has to deal with this. And then Louis, meanwhile, is rising in power. Even though he's been browbeaten for so long, he ends up having an heir.
Do we know
So
which
that
Louis
was
that
something-
was? I'm sorry, what Louis are we on?
Oh, I think the 7th.
The only one I've heard of is the 14th. So
There are a lot of Louis. There's 16, I think, total.
Louis.
Louis. Yeah, there was Louis. There was Louis. There was Louis. There was Louise. No,
Louis
there
and
was
Thelma.
I'm certainly there was Louise. But anyway, so King Louis does not like Henry, and so Henry always has to worry about little battles with him. And then this Becket stuff happens, and he was like, "This is the one thing I thought was going to go right without a problem. My wife is a pain in the butt because Eleanor actually ends up encouraging her sons to rebel against their father."
Oh,
So Henry's whole home life is just garbage. He's extremely well respected by his people and like the majority of his lords, but his wife and kids suck. Or maybe he's the problem.
maybe.
For all we know.
Maybe he wasn't there enough. Yeah.
If your entire family hates you, you might be the problem. But also, he's the king, so he's super demanding. He's super passionate. He's well loved by everybody, and then his kids have to live in the shadow of this giant. And then Eleanor is every bit as ambitious as him, but she's resentful because as a woman, she can't do the things he can do. So that causes some marital friction. And then the Becket thing happens. Yeah. So Becket starts to do something that is, Henry doesn't really see it coming. He starts excommunicating Henry's friends.
Oh.
Just kind of casually, like anybody who sticks up for Henry and tells Becket to shape up, Becket just excommunicates him out of hand. Just immediately. It's like, you're excommunicated. Because he has the power to do that as Archbishop.
Sure. Now,
like,
on a practical level, what does that mean? I mean, you're out of the church, but are you able to participate in society? Do you have to like
largely, if you are excommunicated, so you can't receive any of the sacraments. You're kicked out of the church.
Yeah. In
a society where your connection to God is considered important, the people start to not like you or trust you. He does this to priests as well. Oh. So if you excommunicate a priest, they lose their office.
That seems like a bigger deal.
Okay. That's the big one that really starts to get to Henry. He starts going after bishops. Mm-hmm. Like he'll excommunicate a lord, but half the lords go, who cares what you say? Did the Pope say it? We don't care what you say. Yeah. The one guy he can't excommunicate is the king, but the Pope can. So Becket starts thinking, you gotta get the Pope to excommunicate you. Oh. You're kicked out of Christian society. You can't be Mr. Arbiter of all the problems. And this is becoming an international incident because when the chief religious officer of England is telling his king to buzz off, everybody takes notice. Yeah. So Louis starts to go, well, you're not so strong, are you? And starts building up his army and thinking maybe you're not a problem. Uh-oh. Barbarossa, meanwhile, was being kept in check with Henry. And he's like, well, if you can't even protect yourself from this one problematic guy, you can't protect the Pope from me. Uh-oh. So you're not so scary, are you? And Henry knows he's got to handle this. He was hoping he could handle all those other issues and just kind of let the Becket thing die out, but it won't stop. Becket refuses to back down ever. So the Pope wants to solve this because the Pope goes, I agree with Becket 100%. I think that the priests should be tried by higher clergy. And I think that the king should not have control over them. But if I make Henry angry, he's not going to protect me from Barbarossa.
Yeah.
And like I said, Barbarossa is a terror. His army is a very elite fighting force of knights.
And you called him Redbeard or
Redbeard. That's what Barbarossa means. The Redbeard.
Oh, that's what it.
And
Barbarossa, I get it.
Barbarossa, yep. And he's this big powerhouse of a guy. Now he's in like his middle ages right now, but he's still very willing to cross the Alps and go and do whatever he has to do.
Don't make me cross the Alps. I'll do it.
And that's literally like the wall that the Pope hopes he'll be like, no, you can't cross the Alps. And he's just like, fine. He crossed the Alps. Everybody, pack up my favorite Bible, my candlesticks, and my best horse, and I'm out.
We put the Alps there for a reason.
Yeah. So they're like, the Pope's kind of like in hiding. He's like in France. And then he would like bounce around because he was worried Barbarossa was going to chase him down and kill him.
Yeah.
So he's hiding. So if he makes Henry mad, Henry's going to chase him too. So then he'll have the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of England wanting to kill him. So the Pope has to kind of walk on eggshells. He could just go, well, I'm in charge of the whole church.
Remember?
And they'll go, yeah, but if we kill you, we pick a new guy. And the last thing he wants is for Barbarossa and Henry to become friends and join up on it. So he's like, okay, so I got to solve this Becket thing. Becket's right, but I need Henry. So he tries to get them to resolve the issues, and they don't. They just get angrier at each other, and it becomes personal. Becket goes after more of Henry's friends and confidants and starts excommunicating even more bishops. He goes after bishops now at this point. Instead of priests and knights and nobles, he excommunicates bishops.
No.
Which
bishops, as we know, can travel any direction diagonally or in distance. What's Becket's master plan here? What's his like? Is he just trying to poke at the king and trying to like?
Seems like he's trying to make Henry bow down.
Huh.
But knowing Henry for so like, it's not really clear what his goal is, because he should know by now Henry doesn't bow down to anybody, ever. Henry never has. Like, he's this singular personality who just does what he wants because he's good at getting it. He's not. It's less about his ego and more just about his force of will and personality. If he sets himself out to do something, he does it. And historically, he's just always done it. It's not that he just says, well, I'm the king, so you have to do what I want. It's he goes out and does it personally and achieves these great things. He's like, I'm going to marry Eleanor of Aquitaine, and he did. I'm going to conquer this, and he did. I'm going to unite all of my kingdom, and he did. And I'm going to be this active king who's well respected by every member of society, and he did. And then now he's like, so I'm going to curb the power of the church because the secular land leader, or landed leader of this thing, he should be in charge of his own kingdom. And it was reasonable for him to think he could do that because of his track record. He goes from exiled princeling to someone named Matilda to emperor, basically, in everything but name only.
But so far, he's not failed, really. So far,
he's not failed. Yeah, exactly. When your track record is 10-0 or whatever at this point, you haven't had any failures. And he's got like 5 sons, so he's got this secure line of succession, and he's still able to have kids with his wife. And then if he wants to, you can just go pick up another lady at any point.
Sure.
That's a big deal for kings back then, is making sure you had children for everybody back then, from the farmer on up. Because if you're the farmer, you need 5 kids so they can help you carry stuff.
Right.
Otherwise, you have to hire people if you have kids. And so Henry's like,
this is my son luggage cart.
And this is ox puller.
They're good boys.
Don't forget him. That guy's grain harvester. He's my favorite. We trust him with the scythe. He's never cut himself. It's impressive. So Henry has every reason to believe that this will be successful. What's interesting, though, is that Becket keeps, like you said, keeps poking him. And it's like, to what point and purpose? And nobody's really sure. Was Becket trying to beat on this king so that other kings would maybe appreciate him more? Was he trying to actually say, well, no, you're subservient to the cross and you have to listen to the church? Did he have lofty ambitions of becoming a cardinal and maybe the Pope someday? So nobody's really sure exactly what he wants because he didn't quite get there. Because as the title of this episode is, the assassination of Thomas Becket.
Spoilers.
Doesn't survive this. So eventually he and Henry have like a very heated in-person debate where Henry's about to lay hands on it, and they realize they can't be in the same room even together.
Oh no.
They start having to have like meetings like through intermediaries, and Becket gets to the point where Henry's like, if I see you again, I will kill you. He doesn't outright say it, but it's extremely hostile, to the point where Becket flees England and goes to France to the court of the French king to seek protection. So he abandons his parish of Canterbury. He just flees. He takes some followers and a bunch of money and runs away. And Henry's like, well, now I can't kill him, but he's not here.
Yeah, that seems like a win. That feels like a win for Henry.
Yeah, Henry's kind of like, well, so he's in retreat.
Yeah.
But I can't really get him because I'd have to like invade France. I'm not going to do that. I'm not that mad. Well, we'll just see what happens and it'll be fine. And eventually he decides he wants to formally recognize his son, also named Henry, and they just called him Young Henry, to be his heir.
Okay.
Well, to do that, you need the Archbishop of Canterbury to sign off on it.
All right, paperwork.
Not there. He's not there, and they have this contentious relationship. Even if he was there, it wouldn't happen for him. So Henry just says, "Fine, I'll get the Archbishop of York to do it,"
Huh.
and he does. He says, "Archbishop of York, I want you to recognize my son." And the Archbishop's like, "Yeah, you're the king."
Could he have could we have got a new Archbishop of Canterbury instead? Like,
he would have had to get him kicked out of office, and it would have caused like a whole, that might have been almost impossible for him to do, because he would have had to get all of the bishops to sign off on it. But before they could, the Archbishop could have excommunicated all of them, so their vote wouldn't matter. So he couldn't really, once you're Archbishop, you're set.
Yeah.
Pretty much for life. Especially Archbishop of Canterbury. That's the prized position in the Catholic Church in England.
Yeah. They got the best ones.
Yeah. So
York.
Henry can't do anything, so he goes to the Archbishop of York. He just says, "Hey, will you please have my son be accepted and recognized as my heir?" And the Archbishop of York is not nearly as combative as his contemporary at Canterbury. He's like, "Yeah, sure, yeah, sounds good. I've seen what's going on with you. I don't want any of that." Henry the Younger is now heir to the throne. Well, Becket finds out and he blows a gasket.
No.
He immediately plans to like, it makes him so angry that he talks to the Pope and says, "This is wrong." And the Pope sides with Becket to the point where the Pope says, "You know what? We're going to have an interdict on all of England." And what an interdict is, nobody in England is able to hold religious services at all in the entire country. It's like one step shy of excommunicating the whole country.
Wow.
It's saying no religious services will be observed. That includes funerals and baptisms. Nothing.
What's
the
this
priests
called?
to put a hold on everything. Nobody does anything religious, period, full stop, in all of England.
What's it called?
Interdict. It's like an interdiction. Like they just call it an interdict. And that was like that's an extreme penalty.
Yeah, that sounds like everyone's done it.
How many times that's been used. But the Pope was like, "No, interdict. I'm tired of this. You guys are fighting too much."
It's like Christmas is canceled.
And it was. He did. He canceled Christmas. He canceled Easter. They're all done. No holidays. He cancels the whole thing. And all the priests are like, I can't do anything. And Henry knows, well, the priest can't do anything about it. So he has to negotiate. And Henry's not, he's not a bad negotiator. Henry's a really good negotiator. He's a very canny negotiator, but he really doesn't want to because he is very like, no, I was right, and this guy sucks, and I'm the king.
I'm the king.
I'm the king, and you listen to him. And So this is 1169. The Pope just says, no, whole of England, interdiction, no religion, which is really, really bad. Like I said, that's one step shy of like excommunicating the whole country. And if he did that, like every other country could just go to England and do whatever they wanted, and that would be okay.
And a short 800 years later, John Lennon sang about it. Imagine religion.
That's true. Touche. Well played.
That would have played funnier if you're in the same room with me.
It would have played a lot funnier. Everything plays a lot funnier if we're in the same room.
That's true.
What would be even funnier is if you got sick.
Yeah, hilarious.
Not really. I'm actually, I'm looking forward to this whole thing getting lifted, and we can go back
for sure. In
person. So hopefully this is done after the next couple of days.
We'll see.
But anyway, so Henry's faced with this huge crisis of, oh no, my whole country can't religion. The whole country can't religion. This is that. So he goes back to the, negotiating table, and he says, all right, fine. Becket can come back. I won't punch him in the face if I see him again.
Fine.
I will be less belligerent towards him, and we will talk about these other issues, because this really has gotten out of hand, and I've got other stuff to do. I have a whole country to run, and I don't need my own side yelling at me.
I just imagine him every night going home, like going into his room, just like, I'm the king. I'm the king.
I feel like that's exactly what he's like. Do you even know who I am? I'm the most powerful guy in Europe.
What's the point? What's the point of being the king if you can't do what you want to do?
That's the because really that is a king. That's not. He's not a president. He's not elected. He is the king, and that's at the time divine will chose him. God-given, he's supposed to be the guy, but he can't do anything to this stupid priest, and it's infuriating for him.
Yeah.
But he finally just says, fine, I will settle things down. I got other stuff to worry about. And I mean, respect to Henry for this, because he actually he backs down a little bit. He just says, I'll call off the dogs.
Give me my crown. I just want to cuddle it.
Yep. And he's just like, I feel like he just had like a sit down and he had a good cry.
Yeah.
And he's just like, this is so stupid. He was my best friend, and I thought things were going to be cool, and they're not cool, and life sucks.
Oh, poor king.
He probably, I feel like he just did the classic. He just took his sword and he just beat the crap out of something in an orchard. Like he just killed a tree with a sword. He's like, okay, I'm done. he worked it out as best he could. He got all his frustrations out, and then he said, let's talk. Because I'm too tired to punch you in the face. So Becket returns to England, and things are calm for about a day.
Oh, no.
And then Becket almost immediately excommunicates 3 bishops on the spot. He keeps going after Henry's guys. And Henry, who had tucked his tail, bitten his tongue, and gotten cowed already, and he went back to the table, and he was willing to give demands. That's the last straw. He instead of all of his anger and rage being in private, it's now become a public thing where he's willing to vent his issues in front of anybody who will listen to him. So one night in France, he's just had enough. He hears that his more bishops have been excommunicated, and he's surrounded by his retainers. And he's famous as saying, This is recorded from a contemporary source. He said, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk."
Bang.
This has later on been taken as, somebody else later in history said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" So Henry's general thing is, I am the king and I am being treated like crap by this peasant that I made into something important. And none of you assholes are doing anything about it. Nobody's got my back. I am doing all of the work here, and I'm the only one getting screwed, and I am fed up. And his, again, his temper is famous. Like, Henry's known for his passion and his energy, but that's the double-edged sword of when he got mad, it was bad. Like throwing goblets and hitting like his knight. Like he apparently was not abusive to like his wife and children, so that's good.
Okay.
But when you have a warrior king running around and he's always got his sword with him, people are lucky he didn't just start killing folk, but he was like furious, overturning tables, screaming and shouting and throwing stuff, and it just culminated with this. So his guys are all terrified of him at this point. And 4 knights get it into their head, he wants us to kill this guy.
What kind of conversation do you suppose that was? Like afterwards at the pub? Like, hey, oh boy. Here we go.
Henry's a little mad, huh?
Yeah. Another round. We gotta talk this over.
What do you think we should do, guys?
I don't know.
He threw a goblet at Pierre. He gave him a concussion. What should we do? Well, I would just kill the priest. That's what he's complaining about, and everybody didn't want. I don't see a problem with that. It's a win-win. King's happy. Maybe we get rewarded. Maybe we don't, but the king's happy.
Yeah.
And he can go.
How hard can it be to kill a priest?
And he's a priest. He's just a clerk. The king's right. He's just some clerk. This guy should learn his place. So maybe the idea is maybe, it's not one of those, they got rip-roaring drunk and wandered down the street and punched somebody in the face. They were in France. He was in England. Okay. So this took planning and prep. They didn't just drunkenly gallop off and go do something stupid. But these 4 knights do decide. They make the pact to solve the problem.
Solve the problem.
So they go to England and they go to Canterbury and they find Thomas Becket at Canterbury because that's where he lives.
Hey, Tom.
Big, fancy place. I want to get the exact, I want to get the description of what happened. Because it was too long to write it all out. But there's a contemporary source of exactly what happened. And it is one of the most gruesome things I've ever read. So they find Becket alone in the church. These are 4 knights, full armor. And this is the height of what it meant to be like how you forge a warrior. Okay. So these guys have spent at least 14 years just preparing to become a knight. And these are members of a Henry's household. They have fought in almost every war and battle he's been in. These are scary guys. They are killers. These are not fancy, like, oh yes, I'm a knight, honor and all that. These are killers. These are guys who wear 50 pounds of chainmail everywhere they go with their swords and their helmets and their shields on horseback. They don't get tired like normal people. They push through the worst situations and they happily kill anyone and anything for their king. And they're going to go after a clerk, basically. Like Henry said, he was a clerk. He was good with, like, in a fight, but he wasn't like a warrior like they were. He was that guy who was like, he could maybe duel some peasant or beat somebody up in a bar fight. That's why Henry liked him, but he wasn't a knight. So these 4 warriors go there and they talk to the local priest and say, "Where's Becket? We're here on the king's business." And the priest knows what's up. So he immediately makes the choice of, do I act like I'm going to help Becket, or do I jump in enthusiastically and help out the giant Norman knights who are kicking down the door? And he makes for himself the right call and joins the knights.
Oh.
So what's described by somebody who wrote, this is written down, who was wounded in the attack. Because these knights breach the room and just lay into anybody who gets in their way. So it says, the impious knight suddenly set upon Becket and shaved off the summit of his crown, which the sacred chrisms consecrated to God. So he scalps it in front of everybody. Then with another blow received on the head, he remained firm. Becket refuses to budge, like holding onto this pillar. And he's like, I'm not leaving my church. You're going to kill me. You're killing me on the altar. So the third blow, the stricken martyr bent his knees and elbows, offering himself as a living sacrifice, saying in a low voice, for the name of Jesus and the protection of church, I am ready to embrace death. The third knight inflicted a grave wound on the fallen one, and with this blow, his crown, which was large, separated from his head. So the blood turned white from the brain, yet no less did the brain turn red from the blood. It purpled the appearance of the church. The fifth, not a knight, but the cleric who had entered with the knights, placed his foot on the neck of the holy priest and precious martyr, and, it is horrible to say, scattered the brains with the blood across the floor, exclaiming to the rest, we can leave this place, knights. He will not get up again.
Yeah.
So they murder him. They cut off the top of his head, scatter his brains across the floor, and this priest helps.
Well,
it's horrifying.
I mean, at that point, I guess, why not help?
Yeah. But I just love the audacity of this priest coming. He's just like, he's not getting up again.
Gross.
That's nasty. I think that's worse than the knights doing what because they're at least like, yeah, I'm just killing this guy. And he's like, meh. I helped. It's like the guy who jumps in at the end of the fight and kicks the guy who's already on the ground, but worse because he just kicked his brains all over the floor. So they murder Thomas Becket. And then he finds out and just kind of goes, oh shit.
I mean, I said
that is not what I wanted. That is not what I asked for. But rather than arrest the knights, because that would have probably alienated everybody else, because like, well, you didn't tell us what you wanted or what you didn't want. And nobody has ever come out and said that Henry ordered this guy be killed, or even that he intentionally wanted this guy killed. Because Henry makes some very serious efforts afterwards to say, I didn't want this.
Right.
So the four knights, while he doesn't hunt them down, he doesn't give them, he says they can't stay with him. He will not let the knights shelter in his court. The knights end up going to the Pope because the Pope immediately excommunicates them. And then he excommunicates Henry for being part of it.
Yeah.
Blames everybody, which is fair. The knights go to Rome and say, we're really, 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 really sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing. And rather than just whack them, the Pope says, you all have to serve for 14 years in the Holy Land as crusaders, which is almost like a death sentence.
Yeah.
But again, this is kind of that we have these hyper-violent death machine knights. Let's just point them in a safe direction and let them go. Better to have them off killing the infidel in the Holy Land than here murdering archbishops. So, horribly, in gruesome fashion. So he rescinds the excommunication and sends them back. Meanwhile, Henry gets hit with another rebellion from his damn kids. So he's very distracted for 2 years, and eventually he's able to defeat it. And it's his three eldest sons. It's because his youngest and heir, or actually I think it was his eldest and heir, but young Henry dies. The one who kind of caused this accidentally by being crowned by the Archbishop of York, he dies. He gets sick and dies. So Henry's like, well, poop. And then the three brothers that are remaining are like, me, I want to be king. And Henry says, I'm not making anybody officially king right now.
Yeah, it didn't work out well the last time.
Yeah, this caused problems. So Eleanor says, I think all my sons should rise up against their dad. So Eleanor gets Richard, John, and Geoffrey. So Dick, John, and Jeff. And they rise up against Henry. And Henry spends the next 2 years beating the crap out of him. When Henry's done, I see it He wins,
Yay.
which nobody really expected because he's had a real rough couple of years.
Yeah.
But he manages to beat his sons, and he doesn't kill them. Regardless of how many times he rises against them, he never kills his kids.
I never thought I'd be happy to hear the phrase, he manages to beat his sons. All right, good for him.
He manages to beat his sons. So he defeats,
finally our boy gets a win.
He gets a win. So he defeats them in battle, and then he immediately goes to Thomas Becket's tomb in a burlap shirt, on foot, no shoes, and humbles himself. There's suggestions that he was whipped publicly as penance, like he felt he owed penance. Whether this was just him making a really big show that I just won a war and I'm awesome, and on top of that, I'm going to apologize for something that I didn't do, but I'm going to own it and I'm going to feel bad about it. On top of that, he encourages this cult of Becket that rises up where they worship Thomas Becket, because on top of all of this craziness, on 21 February of 1173, Alexander III, the Pope, canonizes Becket as a martyr and a saint.
Thanks, Pope.
Yep. So Henry's really like,
can't get a break.
So after the war, and this happens like in the middle of his war, so he's like, oh crap, well, I'll wrap this up and then I'll go apologize. So then he goes and he shows a great deal of respect for this. Other consequences of Becket's death then are there's this cult that builds up around him that worships him as this martyr who died for the church, died for this cause, died horribly. And he kind of becomes this representative of the church versus the state.
Yeah, I would say.
Obviously, right? And like the brutality of the state when dealing with the church. And he's used as kind of a rallying cry for years and years and years. He's so inspirational that an order of knights are created in Accra, which is one of the largest Crusader-owned cities in the Middle East. So in 1191, they create the Order of St. Thomas to kind of commemorate him. And it's largely started by the 4 knights who killed him. They're like an inspiration for that. And they become part of this holy order, or at least kind of the launch point, because they might be dead by then. And they create this, and that's Becket's legacy, and it lasts for a very long time. I see. Are we all done? So yeah, anyway, Becket becomes a saint. So today, St. Thomas Becket is still a saint. Thomas of Becket is also his other term, Thomas of Canterbury, St. Thomas. And he's got his tomb, which is still a Canterbury Cathedral, but it was defiled in 1538. His actual shrine was destroyed during the Reformation. Oh. Because they're like, F this guy, he's the Catholic priest, we're Protestants, blah, blah, blah. And again, this is the English Reformation, so this is Henry VIII, who really hated the church. So to get in good with Henry VIII, they're like, yeah, we'll just smash this guy because that's kind of like your pseudo ancestor that he stood up to, and we stand by punching priests for our king. Go Henry. But to this day, Thomas Becket is still respected as this guy who stood up for what he believed in. And it's funny because like during his lifetime, he wasn't well liked, not by priests. Even the Pope who canonized him didn't really like him because he was causing problems.
He sounds like kind of a jerk.
Kind of a jerk. But he died. He was willing to die for what he believed in, rather than say, yeah, you guys scared me into doing what you want. And he died kind of he died as a martyr. He died saying, this is for God and this is for the church, and I did what I want. And no matter what his motives were, everything he did actually lines up with what he said he was doing it for, was to maintain the control of the church, power of the church, sanctity of the church. So there's a level of respect you have to give for that. But then you also have to look at like the genius of Henry after that, because he kind of coddled this growing cult of Becket. Like, oh yes, he was a saint. He was a great man. And those naughty knights who murdered him, who had nothing to do with me. And so he makes like yearly pilgrimages and offerings in respect to Becket at St. Dunstan's, which is considered the main pilgrimage site for Becket, and also his shrine. But yeah, so that's that's the assassination of Thomas Becket. It's
So
got kind of,
really, I mean, Becket still I mean, he died horribly, but also he
yeah,
kind of won the battle of ideas, though. Really,
he did. He
kind of
did.
pulled a Obi-Wan Kenobi. I shall become
He
more
did.
powerful.
Strike me down, and he did. And that's a really good point because Thomas Becket is remembered as this heroic martyr and saint. But if he hadn't died, he probably just would have been remembered as another bastard
Yeah.
in the church who used it for power, because we don't know what his end result was. And he died, he was only about 60 years old. So he could have gone on and done even more stuff. Who knows what he would have done in his life?
You're never too young to have the top of your head cut off and brains kicked around the room.
And that's never how they show it. Like in the movie, there's a great movie about it called Becket, and it's Peter O'Toole and I think it's Richard Burton plays Becket, and they just stab, I think, which because it's 1960, you can't just.
Yeah, special effects.
Tarantino film version. It's just brains everywhere.
Well, that was the assassination of Thomas Becket, Archduke of Canterbury.
Yep.
Thanks, Will. That was delightful.
Yeah, except for the horrific the retelling of how he died, which is, I just felt like telling that because I thought I'd never really read something that was described that intensely from like a medieval manuscript.
Sure.
Like, this is how gross this was. This is so bad. This is what happened.
Well, and certainly I'm sure that other people have been killed just as violently, but the fact that
definitely
a high-profile person.
Exactly.
No.
It was such a high-profile assassination by these guys. It's crazy. But next week, we have almost no violence.
Okay,
I mean, so maybe fighting, but not like anything like that. That's the plan.
So next week we'll be discussing the excommunication of Martin Luther. We'll learn all about that next week. I want to learn about
that next week. Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King. This is significantly earlier. 1521. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back to our normal arrangement soon. If not, just excuse us for a while. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And we'll talk to you about more history in the future.
Yeah, make sure you share it with other people. Put it on the Facebook and the Twitter and the TikTok, whatever. However else people share stuff. Share this stuff. This is important. This is good
just keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Watch it in a dark room to get by yourself.
Yeah, don't hog history. This should be shared.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.